It was just another ordinary evening, the sun dipping below the skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and purple. The streets buzzed with life, cars honking in frustration, pedestrians hurrying home. Among them, a man in a black sedan waited patiently at a red light, unaware that his night was about to take a turn he'd never forget. Just as the light turned green, a screech of tires broke through the usual city noise. A police siren wailed, not from an official squad car but from an old battered sedan with flashing blue lights hastily attached to the roof. The so-called officers inside barked orders through a cheap loudspeaker, signaling the man to pull over. The driver hesitated, his hands tightening around the steering wheel. Something felt off. The car didn't bear any police markings, and the two men inside didn't wear proper uniforms, just black tactical vests over casual clothing. Still, he complied, steering his car to the side of the road, his heartbeat picking up. One of the men stepped out with a swagger that reeked of false confidence, gripping a fake badge between his fingers as he tapped on the driver's window. "License and registration," the fake cop demanded, his voice thick with authority. The driver, confused but cautious, rolled down his window just enough to respond. "What's the issue, officer?" he asked, his tone respectful but wary. The second man, leaning against the fake squad car, let out a scoff. "You were driving suspiciously. We need to check your documents," he said, crossing his arms as if he had all the power in the world. The intimidation tactic was clear. They wanted him nervous, compliant, but what they didn't know was that they had just pulled over the worst possible target. A few feet away, a third man watched everything unfold, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. Unlike the victim, he wasn't just any bystander. He was the commissioner of the state police, dressed in plain clothes. His sharp eyes took in every detail, from the trembling hands of the driver to the arrogant smirks of the imposters. His years in law enforcement told him one thing: these men weren't just pretending. They had likely done this before, and they were comfortable in their deception. As he observed, the fake cops pushed further, one leaning into the car. "You carrying anything illegal? Maybe something you shouldn't have?" he asked, his voice dropping to a mock-friendly tone. "We can make this go away. For a small fee." That was it. A classic shakedown. The commissioner felt a slow smile creep onto his face. These wannabe cops had no idea what was coming. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. The undercover commissioner remained still, watching the scene unfold with quiet intensity. His years in law enforcement had taught him the importance of patience, of letting the guilty believe they were in control, right up until the moment they weren't. The two imposters had no idea that the man casually leaning against a lamppost just a few feet away was the last person they should be scamming. The taller of the two fake cops, the one with the cheap badge and the cocky smirk, leaned in closer to the driver. "Listen, pal," he said, tapping on the window, his fingers drumming with impatience. "We can make this real simple. A small fine, right here, right now, and you can be on your way. No tickets, no hassle." His voice was smooth, almost practiced. This wasn't their first time. The driver, a middle-aged man with nervous eyes, swallowed hard. "But I didn't do anything wrong," he protested, his voice barely above a whisper. The second fake cop scoffed, shaking his head as if he had heard this excuse 100 times before. "That's what they all say," he muttered, before glancing around the street. His gaze briefly landed on the undercover commissioner, who remained expressionless, simply another unimportant bystander in the night. Satisfied that no one was paying too much attention, the impostor turned back to the driver, his tone shifting to something darker. "Look, buddy, we can do this the easy way, or we can take you down to the station. And trust me, once you're there, this little problem, it's going to cost you a lot more to make it disappear." The commissioner's jaw tightened. The sheer audacity of these two was almost impressive. They had the routine down, the false authority, the intimidation, the veiled threats. But what they didn't have was real power, and they were about to learn that the hard way. The driver hesitated, his hands visibly trembling as he reached for his wallet. He was scared, and that's exactly what these guys wanted. The commissioner had seen this kind of scam before, preying on law-abiding citizens who feared any trouble with the police. But tonight, things would be different. The taller fake cop smirked as he watched the driver pull out a few bills. "That's more like it," he said, nodding in approval. "See? We're reasonable guys." The commissioner exhaled slowly, stepping forward at last. His movements were calm, deliberate, but there was an unmistakable authority in his stride. As he approached the car, the imposters barely spared him a glance, just another pedestrian in their little game. He stopped just beside the fake officer holding the money, his voice low but firm. "That's an interesting way to enforce the law." The words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. The imposter flinched slightly, turning to face him fully for the first time. His smirk faltered, but only for a second. "Move along, buddy. This doesn't concern you." The commissioner tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Oh, I think it does." He took another step closer, his presence suddenly suffocating. "Because you're not real cops, and you just made the biggest mistake of your lives." For the first time that night, the confidence in the fake cop's eyes wavered. They had picked the wrong man to con. For a moment, there was silence. The two fake cops exchanged a quick glance, sizing up the man who had just inserted himself into their business. He wasn't backing down, and there was something in his eyes, something unreadable, but they had dealt with nosy civilians before. The taller one, the apparent leader of the duo, scoffed and folded his arms. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he sneered, trying to reassert his dominance. "You got some kind of problem?" The commissioner let a small smirk tug at the corner of his lips, but he kept his posture relaxed, non-threatening. He wasn't ready to tip his hand just yet. "Just an interested citizen," he replied, his tone casual. "It's not every day you see officers demanding cash in the middle of the street." The shorter fake cop, the twitchier of the two, shifted uncomfortably. "You should mind your own business, old man," he muttered, his fingers tapping anxiously against his belt. The commissioner noted the movement. Nervous, uncertain. Good, but the taller one wasn't as easily shaken. He took a step forward, angling his body slightly to block the commissioner's view of the driver, still gripping his wallet. "Look, we're handling police matters here. You don't want to get involved, trust me." The commissioner raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "Oh, I get it," he said, nodding as if suddenly enlightened. "This must be one of those off-the-books operations, real quiet. No paperwork, no radio calls. Just you two enforcing the law in your own special way." The fake cops stiffened. It was subtle, but the commissioner caught it, like a pair of con men realizing they were being baited. The taller one forced a chuckle, but his patience was wearing thin. "That's right," he said, playing along with forced confidence. "Special operations. You wouldn't understand how things work." "Oh, but I'd love to," the commissioner said smoothly, stepping just a little closer. He could feel the tension rising, the balance of control shifting with every passing second. "See, I've always been curious. How exactly do these special operations work? Do you guys take turns picking the target, or do you just go for whoever looks the most scared?" The shorter fake cop's jaw clenched. "I said mind your damn business." The taller one shot his partner a glare, silently telling him to shut up, but it was too late. The commissioner had them. He could see the cracks forming, the irritation in their eyes, the way their confidence wavered when pressed. They weren't used to being questioned. The taller one straightened his shoulders, trying to regain control. "Listen, we don't have time for this," he said, his voice sharper now. "Unless you want to be the next guy we take in, I suggest you walk away." The commissioner's expression didn't change. His heart rate remained steady, his posture unshaken. "Take me in?" he echoed, tilting his head slightly. "That's an interesting idea." He glanced at the driver, who was now watching the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes. "What do you think, pal? Should I pay my fine now? Or do you think these fine officers will be kind enough to escort me downtown?" The shorter, fake cop was unraveling fast. "We don't need to take him in. Let's just get what we came for," he muttered under his breath. But the taller one was still clinging to the illusion of control. His eyes bore into the commissioner's, searching for something. Hesitation, fear, anything he could use. But there was none. Instead, there was an unsettling calm, a kind of Stillness that only came from someone who had been in situations far more dangerous than this. "You know what?" the commissioner said after a beat, his smirk widening just a fraction. "I think I will come with you. Let's see where this special operation of yours really leads." And just like that, the trap was set. The street lights flickered, above, casting long shadows as the tension thickened. The taller fake cop squared his shoulders, his smirk gone now, replaced with something colder. The way this stranger, this nobody, was speaking to them, unshaken, almost amused, was getting under his skin. He wasn't used to being questioned, let alone mocked. This wasn't how their routine played out. Usually their targets either cowered in fear or paid up quickly to avoid trouble. But this man? He was different. The shorter fake cop, the twitchy one, was already restless. His fingers fidgeted at his belt, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. "We don't have time for this, man," he muttered under his breath. "Let's just take the money and go." But the taller one wasn't backing down. His pride wouldn't allow it. "No!" he growled. "This guy wants trouble? Let's give him trouble." He reached into his vest and pulled out a cheap pair of handcuffs, the kind sold at military surplus stores. They weren't even proper police issue, but that didn't matter. He held them up, letting the metal catch the dim glow of the street lamp. "All right, smart guy," he said, his voice dripping with false authority. "You're under arrest for obstructing police business." The commissioner remained still, his expression unreadable. He let a beat of silence pass before raising an eyebrow. "Obstructing police business?" he echoed, his tone laced with quiet amusement. "That's a new one. What's the charge? Asking too many questions?" "Turn around," the fake cop snapped, stepping forward. "Hands behind your back." For the first time that night, the commissioner chuckled. It was low, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the shorter fake cop shift uneasily. "You really think this is going to work?" the commissioner asked, his voice calm, steady. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there, watching them. The taller fake cop's patience snapped. He grabbed the commissioner's arm, gripping tightly, his fingers digging in. "I said turn around," and that's when it happened. The commissioner moved fast, too fast for them to react. In a blink, he twisted his arm free, spinning just enough to throw the fake cop off balance. Before the man could even register what was happening, the commissioner had stepped forward, closing the gap between them in an instant. His hand clamped down on the fake cop's wrist, twisting it just enough to send a sharp jolt of pain up his arm. The handcuffs clattered to the pavement. The taller fake cop yelped, stumbling back, his eyes wide with shock. The shorter one reacted, purely on instinct, reaching for something tucked into his waistband. A weapon? A fake baton? It didn't matter. The commissioner was faster. Before the man could even grip it properly, the commissioner shot him a look, a sharp, cutting glare. That froze him in place. "You really don't want to do that," the commissioner said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. For the first time that night, the power dynamic had shifted completely. The fake cops, who had spent their evening intimidating. Others now stood stiff and uncertain. The shorter one, still gripping his waistband, swallowed hard. The taller one flexed his fingers, rubbing at his sore wrist, his mind racing for an escape. "Here's what's going to happen," the commissioner said, his voice even. "You're going to back off. You're going to rethink your life choices. And if you're very, very lucky, you might get to walk away from this." The taller fake cop sneered, trying to salvage his pride. "Or what?" he spat. "You gonna fight us? You think you're some kind of badass?" The commissioner smiled. "No," he said simply. "I think I'm the last person you should have messed with tonight." And before they could respond, before they could even begin to understand the mistake they had made, the sound of distant sirens pierced the air. Their time was up. The taller fake cop flexed his sore wrist, his ego bruised more than his body. His anger simmered beneath the surface, but the commissioner could see it in his eyes. Uncertainty creeping in. The shorter one still had his hand hovering near his waistband, debating whether to escalate things further. The commissioner stood. Between them, calm, unwavering. He had already dismantled their illusion of power, but now it was time to end the game completely. "All right," the commissioner said suddenly, raising his hands ever so slightly, just enough to appear compliant. "If you insist on taking me in, let's go." The fake cops hesitated. They hadn't expected him to agree. Their scam had always relied on intimidation. No one ever volunteered to go along with them. The taller one recovered first, shoving his bruised pride aside and seizing the opportunity. "Damn right, you're coming with us," he barked, grabbing the commissioner's arm more forcefully than needed. "Let's move." The shorter one glanced around nervously. The street wasn't empty. There were a few distant pedestrians, a couple of cars driving by. Nothing too concerning, but enough to make him uneasy. "We're taking him," the taller one interrupted. His grip on the commissioner tightened. "And if he wants to act smart, he can explain himself downtown." Downtown. A lie. Of course. They had no station, no precinct. They were taking him somewhere off the grid, somewhere quiet, somewhere they thought they'd be in control. Perfect. The commissioner allowed himself to be led toward their unmarked vehicle. His steps, deliberate, unhurried. As he approached, he made his move, subtle, effortless, invisible to the untrained eye. His hand, which had been casually resting against his side, pressed a small button inside his jacket pocket. A silent distress signal. A direct line to his real team. The shorter fake cop opened the back door of their car. "Get in," he muttered, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. The commissioner slid inside, settling into the seat like he had all the time in the world. The taller one slammed the door shut, and the two imposters hurried into the front. The engine rumbled to life, and they peeled away from the curb. Inside the car, the air was thick with tension. The commissioner leaned back, watching them through the rearview mirror. The taller one gripped the wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. The shorter one kept glancing at him as if trying to convince himself this was still under control. "You're awfully quiet," the commissioner mused, his voice calm. The taller fake cop scoffed. "Don't push your luck?" The commissioner smirked. "Just making conversation. I mean, if I'm going to be arrested, at least let me know which precinct we're headed to." The shorter fake cop let out a nervous chuckle, but it died in his throat when the taller one shot him a glare. "You'll find out soon enough," he snapped. The commissioner glanced out the window. They were moving further away from the main roads, slipping into quieter streets, where streetlights were fewer and buildings were spaced farther apart. Good. The trap was almost fully set. He exhaled slowly, glancing at his watch. Any minute now. "You know," the commissioner said, leaning forward, slightly. "I have to admit, you two play the part well. The fake badge, the threats, the whole intimidation routine. It's impressive. You've clearly had practice." Neither of them responded. The shorter one shifted uncomfortably, but the taller one remained focused on the road. "But," the commissioner continued, lowering his voice just a fraction, enough to let the weight of his words sink in, "you made one mistake tonight." The taller fake cop scoffed. "Oh, yeah? And what's that?" The commissioner smiled. "You picked the wrong guy." Before they could react, flashing red and blue lights exploded through the rear windshield. A chorus of sirens wailed in unison, shattering the silence of the deserted street. The taller fake cop's hands tightened on the wheel as panic flickered. Across his face, the shorter one spun around, his eyes wide with horror. "What the—" The commissioner leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'd suggest pulling over," he said, his voice calm, "unless you want to add resisting arrest to your list of bad decisions tonight." The car skidded to a halt. The trap had sprung. The silence inside the car was deafening. The flashing blue and red lights from the real police vehicles illuminated the fake cops' faces, painting them in shades of panic. Their breathing grew shallow, their eyes darting to the rearview mirror, watching as the convoy of real law enforcement surrounded them like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. The taller fake cop's hands trembled against the steering wheel. His knuckles turned white as he gritted his teeth. "What the hell is this?" he hissed. The shorter one, who had been nervous from the start, looked even worse now. His lips parted, his chest rising and falling rapidly as the realization dawned on him. "Oh no, oh no, no, no," he muttered under his breath. And then, in the back seat, the commissioner exhaled slowly, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Looks like backup's here," he said, his voice calm, almost amused. The taller fake cop whipped his head around, his face twisted in confusion and anger. "Who the hell are you?" The commissioner took his time, straightening his jacket as he leaned forward slightly. The weight of the moment pressed down on the two imposters like a collapsing building. "Who am I?" he repeated, tilting his head slightly. Then, with measured precision, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and flipped it open. The gold badge inside gleamed under the strobing police lights. The words engraved on it hit the fake cops like a freight train. The shorter one gasped audibly, his face draining of color. His body slumped against the passenger seat as if all the strength had been sucked out of him. "Oh my God," he whispered. The taller one was frozen, his mouth slightly open but no words coming out. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. This wasn't some nosy civilian, this wasn't just another victim. They had been playing their little power trip on the most powerful law enforcement officer in the state. The commissioner snapped the wallet shut with a crisp motion. "Surprised?" he asked, his voice steady, laced with quiet authority. "You should be. You've been digging your own grave since the moment you stopped that car tonight." Outside, the real officers were already stepping out of their vehicles, weapons drawn, voices booming through the night air. "Step out of the vehicle. Hands where we can see them." The shorter fake cop's breathing turned ragged. "We didn't know," he stammered, shaking his head as if he could undo the last 20 minutes of his life. We thought. You thought. You were untouchable," the commissioner finished for him. His tone wasn't angry, it was factual, as if he were explaining the weather. "But there's something you should have learned a long time ago. Real power isn't something you fake. And real cops? We don't take kindly to imposters." The taller one suddenly lunged for the gear shift, his last-ditch attempt to escape, but it was over before it even started. In an instant, the commissioner's hand shot forward, grabbing his wrist in a steel grip. The fake cop cried out in pain, but the commissioner twisted just enough to keep him in place. "Don't," he said, his voice low, commanding. "You're already in a deep hole. Don't make it worse." The car doors were yanked open from the outside, and within seconds, both fake cops were dragged out and slammed against the hood of their vehicle. Their protests were drowned out by the chorus of officers reading them their rights. The commissioner stepped out last, adjusting his cuffs as he surveyed the scene. The real officers saluted him, their eyes filled with a mix of respect and amusement. "Quite the catch tonight, sir," one of them said, shaking his head. These two had no idea who they were messing with. The commissioner exhaled, watching as the imposters were cuffed and hauled toward the squad cars. "No," he said, his voice steady. "But they do now." The two imposters were forced against the hood of their car, their hands cuffed behind their backs, their bodies trembling under the weight of their own panic. The taller one still had remnants of defiance in his eyes, but the shorter one? He was breaking apart by the second, his breathing erratic, his lips quivering as he tried to speak. "Psh, please," the shorter fake cop stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. This was just a misunderstanding. We were just... What?" the commissioner interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Just shaking down innocent people? Just pretending to be something you're not? Just abusing power you don't even have?" The shorter one flinched at every word, his body deflating further. He turned his head slightly, his eyes desperate. "It wasn't like that," he pleaded. We were just trying to survive, man. The economy's bad and—" The commissioner tilted his head, watching him with a mixture of disappointment and curiosity. "So that's your excuse? Desperation?" The taller one, still clinging to whatever pride he had left, let out a bitter scoff. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, shaking his head. "You sit in your office, with your big title, your power. You don't know what it's like out here, struggling to make ends meet." The commissioner took a slow step forward, his presence commanding without being aggressive. "Struggling?" he echoed. "You think you're the only ones. Struggling? There are good, hard-working people out there, people who do things the right way, who don't take shortcuts, who don't prey on others just because life got tough." The shorter one was nodding rapidly, trying to latch onto any sign of mercy. "We messed up, all right? We get it. Just let us go. We'll never do it again, I swear." The commissioner exhaled, glancing down at them, his face unreadable. "You swear?" he repeated, his tone almost contemplative. "That's interesting, because I'm willing to bet this isn't your first time," neither of them answered. The commissioner turned to one of the officers beside him. "Check the system," he ordered. "See if there are any reports of similar incidents matching their description." The officer nodded and stepped away, radioing dispatch. The taller, fake cop stiffened. No, you don't have to do that," he said quickly, his voice betraying the fear creeping into his veins. The commissioner arched an eyebrow. "Why not?" The shorter one squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. He knew they were finished. Within seconds, the officer returned. "Sir, we've got multiple reports over the past few months. Same MO drivers pulled over, harassed, forced to pay cash to avoid arrest. Witness descriptions match these too." The commissioner sighed, shaking his head. "So, tell me again," he said, his gaze locked onto the fake cops. "How this was just a one-time mistake?" The taller one opened his mouth, but no words came out. He slumped against the hood of the car, his head hanging low. "Power," the commissioner said after a moment, stepping between them. "Real power doesn't come from intimidation. It doesn't come from flashing fake badges or pushing people around. Power comes from responsibility, from doing what's right even when it's hard." He leaned in slightly, his voice quieter but no less firm. "And you too? You never had any power. All you had was fear, and fear fades the second people stop believing in it." The shorter one was silently crying now, his body shaking with quiet sobs. The taller one was staring at the ground, his breathing heavy. The commissioner straightened, his expression unchanging. "Take them in," he ordered. The officers nodded, lifting the two men from the hood of the car and leading them toward the waiting squad cars. As they were placed inside, the commissioner turned toward the driver, the man who had almost been their victim tonight. He had been watching the whole thing unfold, still gripping his wallet with white knuckles. "You all right?" the commissioner asked. The driver nodded slowly, exhaling as if finally realizing he could breathe again. "Yeah," he murmured. "Thanks to you," the commissioner offered a small nod. "Next time," he said, "trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't be afraid to ask questions. Real police won't demand cash on the spot. We have procedures. We have accountability." The driver swallowed hard and nodded again. "I won't forget that." The commissioner watched as the squad cars pulled away, their sirens off, but their presence still heavy in the night air. Justice had been served, not just in the arrests, but in the lesson learned. Power wasn't about control. It was about responsibility. And tonight, two men had learned that the hard way. The night air was still thick with tension as the squad cars carrying the two imposters disappeared down the road, their red and blue lights fading into the distance. The commissioner stood in silence for a moment, watching them go, his expression unreadable. He had seen all kinds of criminals in his time, dangerous ones, desperate ones, arrogant ones. But these two? They were something else. They weren't hardened criminals. They weren't violent masterminds. They were just two men who had let greed and ego guide them, who had chosen deception over honest work. And now, they would pay the price for it. An officer approached, nodding respectfully. "Sir, we'll process them at central booking. With the evidence we have, plus the prior complaints, they won't be getting out anytime soon." The commissioner gave a slow nod. "Good. Make sure they're charged properly. False impersonation, extortion, fraud. I want every victim they've ever scammed to know that justice has been served." "Yes, sir." The officer hesitated for a moment, then added, "You think they'll learn from this?" The commissioner exhaled, his gaze shifting to the empty road ahead. "That's up to them," he said simply. "Some people do, some don't. Either way, their days of pretending are over." With that, he turned and walked toward his own car, his mind replaying the night's events. A few days later, the news spread like wildfire. The two fake cops had officially been charged, and their criminal history was now public knowledge. As expected, reports from other victims started pouring in. Drivers who had been too scared to speak up before, now realizing that they weren't alone. The commissioner sat in his office scrolling through the case reports. The justice system would take it from here. But beyond the arrests, something else lingered in his mind. The bigger picture. How easy it was for people to be manipulated. How a badge, even a fake one, could hold so much power over someone who didn't know any better. That was what made this dangerous. Not just the scam itself, but the blind trust people placed in symbols of authority. That's what had to change. Later that evening, the commissioner stood in front of a podium at a press conference, facing a sea of reporters and cameras. His face was calm, his voice steady. He wasn't just here to talk about the arrests, he was here to send a message. These past few days have proven something important, he began, his gaze sweeping across the room. It's not enough to just have law enforcement on the streets. The public needs to be informed. People need to know their rights, to recognize the difference between real officers and frauds. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The commissioner continued, "Real officers don't ask for bribes. We don't operate in secrecy. We don't demand cash to make problems go away. If you ever feel uneasy during an encounter with law enforcement, ask for identification. Request a supervisor. Real police won't be offended by that. We'll respect it." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," he added. "It's about protecting the innocent. And sometimes, the best protection is knowledge." A beat of silence passed, then the reporters erupted into a frenzy of questions. The commissioner answered what he could, but his job wasn't just about making statements. It was about action. That night, as he drove home, he reflected on everything that had unfolded. The fake cops had been taken down, but the lesson they had unknowingly taught would live on. Power, real power, wasn't about control. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about deception. Real power was knowing the difference between right and wrong, and having the courage to stand against those who blurred that line. The commissioner glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Another case closed, another lesson learned, and tomorrow there would be another fight, another battle for justice. But for tonight, he allowed himself one moment of satisfaction. Justice had been served. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.